All right, welcome. It's Thursday, last day of April, and then we have May, and you guys have not too much online classes left until summer. So we're going to continue where we left off with the this lecture here. The last thing we talked about was pretty much how botanical evidence was used in cases. I gave you some insight into a couple cases. Um, so, going into another section of this, we'll be looking at drowning victims, how forensic botany is using that, gastric contents. You may not have thought of how that would play a factor, but we'll go into that. Um, Wilting flowers, how they play a factor into it as well, and then also gravesites. So that's pretty much what we're covering today, Thursday. Your quiz for Chapter 5 is next week, Thursday. We will finish up next week on Chapter 5 notes, Part 3 and 4. So let's continue with Chapter 5 notes. So looking at drowning victims, that is, uh, if you've watched any type of crime show or anything like that, you can have and understand that when someone drowns, they're going to have evidence of water in their lungs. Okay, so what is in that water is going to help understand where that person was. Okay, you have certain things in there, such as algae. That's kind of that mossy green growth that is going to cover the top of the ponds or water areas. You also have other algae as well, but you also have structures that are called diatoms. Okay, so these diatoms are that's what a diatom is going to look like. It's a silica type cell wall, but these diatoms are going to be present as well. So, by comparing the number and proportion of algae and diatoms in a drowned person's lungs and body tissues, it is possible in some cases to determine where he or she drowned. And not only that, but also you can create a timeline. The next part here, or a PMI, postmortem interval, is fewer than 20 different species of diatoms indicate that it was recent. More than 50 species indicate that it was a longer post-mortem interval. So if you're looking at the book, there is a case that is talked about as far as two boys were beaten in Connecticut, restrained, and then pretty much left to drown. Well, one was able to escape, helped the other out, and they pretty much took his clothes and analyzed his clothes and found out that they had diatoms from the pond that they were at, and they were able to match those diatoms to the assailant. Okay, so pretty much what they did was they took the mud from the shoes. Okay, they took the excuse me, the mud from the shoes and analyzed them. Okay, and they found out that there was 14 out of 15 diatoms present in that sample on both shoes, or I guess all three. Okay, so the two victims and then the one suspect. Not only that, okay, not only did they contain the same species of diatoms, but they also compared the proportions, and they were the exact same proportions, meaning that the percentage of these diatoms that were found were exactly the same. Okay, so you can determine where that person was based on that proportion of diatoms in that are located in the water and the algae as well. So those species, that gives you that kind of pollen profile that you can link back to the certain pond and things like that. So that's once again what it looks like. Okay, as far as the diatom, they are a little bit different because they are going to have a silica cell wall versus a cellulose cell wall. So that's why it's different. And then you have another one here that is a larger diatom here. Eunodia being one of the more common types of diatoms. Also, you may not recognize this, but your body does not digest cellulose. Okay, that is the cell walls that are present in plants. Okay, and it gives them structure and uniformity and things like that. Well, your cell walls or cellulose and cell walls can easily withstand digestion. So Jane Bach, she's a botanist from University of Colorado. Her and her students created this manual for the most part of helping determine a PMI, similar to that of what we talked about in in Death, chapter 12, talking about stomach contents. There, it's very similar as far as where they're going to be located, but also the amount of digestion based on the contents. Okay. So what they did was they took a bunch of different vegetables and chewed them up, and then created different slides at different parts of these digestion, and you pretty much are able to match them up. So not only are you able to understand how long, but also what types of food it is being digested, and then you can relate that back to a restaurant. Okay, so you can put them at a place, the last place, based on their stomach contents, and it really has to deal with cellulose, not being able to digest cellulose. So how far along that partial digestion is can determine a PMI, and then the contents themselves can determine where that person last had eaten based on their contents and things like that. Secrets from the grave. Want to go over this. So what this is talking about is when a missing persons report is filed, they are going to pretty much look for a recent grave. Okay, and that's just because that's procedure. Now, a recent or an old grave are going to have differences. Okay, so an old grave is actually going to have, it's going to sink in. So the dirt that you took out, put the remains in, and then you buried, that it's going to actually end up sinking in because as the soil settles, air is released and things like that. So it's going to actually sink in. So an old grave is going to have kind of this dip or be sunken a little bit. A new grave is going to be represented by a mound. Okay, which would make sense. You'd put the dirt that you just dug out, you put that over it, and you have a mound now rather than a that part being sunken. Okay. Also, you'll have an absence of vegetation, which makes sense. That's the dirt that you are filling up. So there's really nothing that has grown yet. But also, what's going to happen here is this is kind of an indicator of a grave site. Okay, so when you dig up a grave, you are taking out, and you are pretty much taking out the soil. You're releasing air, you're aerating it, water, and stuff like that. So what happens is you're actually going to be able to grow different plants. Okay, so one way to recognize a grave site is to understand that there's different plants around. Okay, plants that aren't normal there, or not necessarily normal, but don't belong to the same assemblage to what's around, and that's simply because you are creating a little bit better of an environment in order for those plants to grow. Okay, so that's one thing that you can see. Also, you can see tool marks if a shovel, or on branches if things were broken, things like that. You can see. And in 1960, you have an anthropologist, Clyde Snow, that estimated the time of death of a victim as late as June or July based on the size of the soybean found underneath the skeleton. Unfortunately, that was dismissed, but because it was outside of his field, he was an anthropologist, not forensic botanist. So now but with botany being so prevalent, you can that would not be admissible in court. What else? So pretty much need to know an old grave site is you're going to have it sunken in. New grave site, it will be a mound. You'll have an absence of vegetation, but also here you'll have different plants that will grow. So that's the difference between or how to recognize a grave site. So here's someone that is investigating a potential grave site. We'll get to that. The one part I don't know why it's not in here is in your book. It talks about bodies being covered with vegetation and things like that. Jane Bach once again did her own investigation into this, and she pretty much body was found on the side of the road, and you have sunflowers that was covered it, and they were wilted. Pretty much to create a PMI, all you need to do is take those sunflowers, pick those sunflowers, put them in the same type of environment, and time how long it takes them to reach that exact state, and that will give you a PMI. And to identify that, then you would use the amount of time as far as for missing persons report. So a lot of this has to deal with creating a PMI and then looking at missing persons to understand who this person possibly could be. So that's pretty much how you would indicate that as far as dead vegetation, right? Because it decomposes at a certain rate. Now the important thing is to get the environment right. So understanding that. All right, that's it for today. We will cover botanical crime scene analysis on Monday, as well as searching for and mapping botanical evidence, botanical evidence collection, and pollen and spores in forensics. Okay, so thanks for tuning in. Once again, our quiz for this chapter will be next week. It will be May 7th, that Thursday. So enjoy. Thank you.